Good day, viewers. Welcome to a new edition of 30 Minutes, the interactive program of Trust Television with me, Manir Dan Ali. Our guest today is a farmer and an administrator, someone who has been the vice chair of Abuja Municipal Council as long ago as the Abacha era. I'm talking of 1997. He's also been a commissioner of agriculture in Borno State in the northeast. He's a practicing farmer as well and has been into ranching for quite a while. I'm talking about Alhaji Muhammad Aliyu Dili. Alhaji, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good afternoon, viewers.
Can you start by telling us your earliest involvement in farming? I know most of us are born into farming communities, so we come into life and meet it, but I don't know how your own specific.
Yeah, I think it's about the same thing. We all grew up in the farming communities. Well, from our family, grannies and so on, we've been following them to go to farming. But most importantly about the ranching is I adopted later in life, but not quite late. But then, sometimes when I was about 15 years old, I got involved into the livestock. My elder brother one was into livestock rearing, and we got interested. In fact, when I finished my secondary school too, I went and started work with the State Minister of Agriculture and in the livestock department. So I was posted to a ranch, and that was the only ranch in the northern Nigeria at that time. That they call it Borno Cattle Ranch. It was managed by the Americans and then established by the former Dr. Bukar Shahid. Then it was
the former Minister of Agriculture. Dr. Bukar Shahid.
Yes, he was former permanent secretary, Federal Minister of Agriculture in northern Nigeria.
Yes.
So I think it was then he started the ranching.
Right.
So they established it in Borno State, in Borno, just about 35 kilometers out of Maiduguri. It's a very good ranch, because then it was managed by the Australians and the Americans. They come in, every 3 months they change, and then others come in. So, and then it was a breeding ranch where we were doing milking as well as breeding specifically.
That is, you are improving the breeds. The breeds.
Yes.
That is importing maybe semen or even bulls, and then using them to serve the cows.
That's right. Actually, then the northeastern state government, I think even the northern Nigeria, I think they started from the northern Nigerian government importing, exotic breeds from Europe. They normally take them to Mambila, and then some of them they bring them to Biu. Then from where they bring, after adopting to the climate, they bring them to Maiduguri, Adarori, Alabis, and then the Borno Cattle Ranch. There we harvest the semen for the purpose of artificial insemination. Some of them they are kept in the stock as sire bulls that they crossbreed. So out of that, we're able to get a lot of crossbreeds, and then it's a very improved. It was about 4,000 animals then. I mean cows, and then the bulls, different herds.
But what happened? Because you are implying that all those thousands of cows have just disappeared into thin air.
Not exactly. You see, the fact is that there were changes. It was owned by the northeastern state government. Then, when the states were created, I think the state insisted on sharing the animals. The 4 states of Gongola, Borno, and 3 states of Gongola, Bauchi, and Borno, which is now about 6 states, they decided to share the animals, and each state took its own shares to its state. So what was remaining was just very negligible. And then, of course, in the course of the journey, a lot of things happened, and then at the end of the day, the ranch was not viable again. But it was much later when the Boko Haram thing came in, and then they disappeared with some of the remaining animals there.
Okay, so it was the Boko Haram phenomenon that finally ended that dream of the Borno ranch.
Exactly. It was a ranch, well established with all the facilities there, the paddocks, the milking thing, the hospitals, and so on. All the facilities about a ranch is.
But what about in other locations? Because I understand that there are such ranches across the country. There is the one in Niger State called Mokwa Ranch.
Yeah.
I know that even in Katsina, around Runka, there was a big ranch with lots of milk and all the herders there, and then the improvements that you are talking about.
I think
what happened? Why is it that all of this thing at a point disappeared?
Yeah, actually, is the lack of attention to agriculture. with this oil discovery and then the attention to the oil, everybody became so reluctant in agriculture. Agriculture is such a business that takes a longer time, maturity time, and then people feel they need something that will just make money immediately. Money is there anyway, so they don't care about agriculture. What really happened was that there were some ranches beside the Gomboleka ranch. I think the next one was this Mokakatu ranch, and then that of Runka I think was an LIBC. Livestock Investigation and Breeding Center. It was a grazing reserve in grazing reserve, and there are so many of them around. In Kuchiba, in Hiobe, in Nguru, in sort of Darazo, in Bauchi State, and so many other places. We had them a lot in the northern states, in northern Nigeria then. But the same thing happened to almost everyone of them.
All of them kind of disappeared because of neglect, because of maybe also the corruption. Maybe the animals are not being fed, or the officials are feeding fat on them.
That's right.
And what have you?
So that's what it is actually. So they don't care. They only care about the animals. I mean, I can give you an instance. When I finished my service in 1981, I was posted to an LIBC, a very big Dalori. It's just about close to University of Maiduguri.
Yes.
I was in charge of that place, and then I found that we had about 500 cows, and then about 400-500 sheep, this type of breed. And then, of course, there was no water. My body got spoiled, and I came in, very young man, and I was in charge of that. I didn't know how to go and get water. Anybody around too, nobody cared, or go and so I started, looking for a way to get more water to bring to my animals, At a point, and while you're doing that, someone will just, one day you'll just find that someone has, is coming with a letter that he should release one bull. There's an occasion for one of these commissioners or so he released. At the end, I got frustrated, and then I just left because.
So all the bulls disappeared probably.
Well, they didn't disappear at that time, but then at least that type of frustration. There was no feeding, no water, nothing. So you feel frustrated. That's why we just left, and then then I went in the private sector. And since then I never went to the government again. I went to Pfizer. From there, I started my own and so on. So until the time I came into became more mature, and then started my own business as well. So actually, ranching is something that started long ago, but we never cared about it. It is now people are regretting for not doing that. And it's the cattle rearing business is a business that should have been, promoted more in the northern state, because this is why we have comparative advantage.
Yes, people are saying is to see it as a business, not as something that you've inherited. So that way you are looking at the profit and loss, the margins, and all of that.
Agriculture generally is supposed to be. In fact, that's why I respect my former minister Adesina, who said that let us take the agri business as a business, not as a hobby or just a pastime job. So in the real sense of it, everything that you do in agriculture should have done it. You should do it in form of business. How much did you put in there? What are you realizing that? What is the profit? If there is low, try and check out what is happening. Ranching especially, our traditional way of herding animals, grazing, the pastoralists that move from one place to the other, there's no benefit in it. Just a tradition is something that they want to keep a tradition moving. The animals will be there for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, they have not, conceived, and you just carrying them around. Waste of time, waste of money, waste of feeding.
But they are subsidizing the cost of meat. Many people are saying if ranching succeeds and all animals are ranched, not many people can afford meat because it's capital intensive. You have to keep feeding, and the animals eat so much. Well,
it's not exactly like that. It's not about feedlot. If you talk of feedlot, you're bringing them together in one place and then start feeding them intensively, concentrate and so on. No, this is ranching. You still have the land to graze. The only thing is that you are restricted. You have 20 square kilometers. Just like we have established one in Borno State now, the Ruga, that was just commissioned.
Yes,
about
the one that was commissioned recently.
Yes.
Is it in North Zabarmari?
In Mafa.
Yes.
Yes. So this is somewhere that you can travel about 20 kilometers in the same place. You can herd your animals. We just bring them together, attracting them to have markets, some hospitals, some schools, and so on. Just bring them together. But
even the Borno example you are talking about, what we saw of it in video, is just empty expanse of land. So where will the cows graze? Where will the animals eat? Is the feed being brought from somewhere, which means it will cost?
No. This land that you see is a land that has, in fact, we seeded them with pasture. There are natural ones that we seeded. There are ones that are being, sort of being irrigated. It's still there. you know. So, and naturally, most of our animals that you see in the Sahel region, that's how they graze anyway. There is nothing special it's the same graze that you see that in that expansion. That's how they graze. All over from Niger and right down to Nigeria to Cameroon, it's the same thing they do. So only make sure that as the rainy season approaches, we broadcast the grass seeds. And then where it is necessary, we cultivate, but the bigger size of it, we just broadcast. And then,
But all this is sounding suspiciously like government-led. That is the very model that has failed before, the one that you spoke about earlier.
It's not. That one is a ranch owned by the government. That of Ombolikan and Morka and all they are ranches established and owned by the government, run by the government. Then it was not possible for people to go into ranching because they didn't even know about, nobody had the capacity to do that. Now, this one is a ruka. This is some area that has been established for the people. Government has nothing there, except for demonstration that the government, especially in that of Borno now, we had about 100 or so animals for demonstration. We have is a dairy sort of sector where they can now look at what is happening and then do the same thing with their own. It's just a portion less than 0.1% of the land that is being occupied by the government now, just for them to come and see what's happening there. The practices, how do they go about with their ranching? It's not government owned. So what they did is to establish school to see how we are going to get them together in the same place. We established a hospital for them. We have a veterinary clinic for them. In fact, we also establish, irrigated, pasture development for them to see how they are going to do it. They are free to, at the same time, to, ask for a space further for them to go and practice the same that we are doing. This ranch is also connected to other grazing reserves, with the routes, the cattle route that they follow through without going into anybody's farm and then go to the next grazing reserve. Is this not enough for them? And then from there to another grazing reserve. We have a lot of grazing reserves spread, but we made sure that every grazing reserve is connected to a route, a cattle route. They follow
so there wouldn't be any conflict with farmers whose farming
and farmers are also
activities get disrupted.
They don't establish farm on cattle routes. They don't establish farm in Ruga. They have other places to go and establish their farms. So this is how it is being done. So it is not government control.
But being so new, are you confident that it will work? Because the traditional herders are very conservative. They don't easily change their way. They are used to what they are used to, which is migratory herding.
It's true.
So how are you going to convince them to be sedentary?
Even to them, things are getting difficult actually. You see, what used to happen then, we had, or we still have cattle routes spread all over the northern, in fact, the entire nation. And we had grazing reserves. The grazing reserves were established some 75 years ago. Since 54, 53, 55, up to 60, the government was gazetting some grazing reserves. And these were meant for the farmers. Then, for the herders, then most of our farms are just outside the town, 1, 2, 3 kilometers outside the city, outside the village. That's why people establish farms. Then the population was just 50 million people in Nigeria. We have 200 and something million people now. This land this farm that we have around villages are not good enough to feed us again. So people have to go outside. When they venture outside, they go into grazing reserves, And this is what is happening now. So there is a conflict between the animal and the man over the grazing reserve there, because the land that the man used for the farming is not enough for now. So this is what is happening. So these guys are being pushed so much that they are squeezed. They have to move from one place to the other. Then with the fact that also, especially these days, where there was this Boko Haram, the Lake Chad Basin used to be the largest concentration of livestock all over the world,
But even that is drying up. The lake is drying up, so the square kilometer
is still very wide. It's still very big, The only thing is that we are sharing, about 4 or 5 countries are sharing that same basin, and the animals who are settled there. These animals normally don't migrate. They are permanently there. Now that this, insurgent has driven them away from that area, they have to find a way of getting to where there are greener pastures. And they follow the cattle route that was meant for only trade cattle. Cattle route between northern Nigeria and southern Nigeria then was only meant for trade cattle.
That is to go and sell the cattle from northern Nigeria, but not to go and graze.
Now that with this problem of insurgency, they've been denied this area, so they have to go and look for greener areas, and they pass through routes. Unfortunately, along the route too, As the population was growing, some people have established farms along the roads, so they are not allowed to pass. And they don't know, because people don't, even if they don't care, because they believe that this is their village, this is their village area, and then they cannot allow animals to go and stay there or pass there, because, I mean, they have established their farms there. Forgetting about the fact that it is gazetted that this is a grazing area or this is a cattle route. So this is what is happening around, and the conflict is coming up. So
very interesting point you are making there, but I'm afraid I would want us to go on a short break and resume the conversation thereafter.
Thank you.
Viewers, it is 30 minutes, the interactive program of Trust Television, and our guest today is Alhaji Muhammad Aliyu Dili, an agricultural entrepreneur and also an administrator. Welcome back. It is still 30 minutes, and our guest today is Alhaji Muhammad Aliyu Dili, an agripreneur, if I may put it that way, and someone who's also been a commissioner, a vice chairman of the Abuja Municipal Council nearly 30 years ago. If we come back to the discussion about the ranches, now there is a whole ministry devoted to livestock, which is less than a year old. Do you think that is the way to go, and will it be able to correct all the wrongs that have been happening over these several decades from when things were functioning well before the disruption of oil?
Yeah, there is no better way than this one, actually. The establishment of this ministry is the best thing that ever happened to the agricultural industry, more especially the livestock industry, because now attention is going to be focused mainly on livestock, and allied, fields around that. So you see, the fact is that the ministry has now established different departments, which I believe, for promoting, productivity and the culture. The veterinary department is there, which is for animal health and so on. We have the animal husbandry department, you have the poultry, you have the piggery, you have the ruminants,
small ruminants and
so
what have you.
And so now attention is given to each and every one of them separately. All we want is cheap protein, which is going to be made available now with this ministry being established. So
I don't fear that the civil servants will not more of take care of their own interest than the interest of the sector itself, because this has been a department in the Federal Ministry of Agriculture when all this rot was happening.
You see, then, well, naturally, what happened is a societal problem. That is not even about the ministry alone. Anyone that happened, this type of thing can happen. But then, the Ministry of Agriculture, then there was only one department for livestock, which was the veterinary department. Everything in livestock was inside there, which has constricted, has just, micronized the entire, services of the livestock industry. So, but now, in fact, just before, about maybe a year or 2 years ago, and another department was created within the same Ministry of Agriculture, that is Animal Husbandry Department beside the Veterinary Department, which takes care of only the health. Now we are into the promotion of the full blast, livestock industry. We now go into breeding, improvement. We go into pasture development. We go into health and taking care of disease control and so on. We go into, a lot of other things that are happening now, especially the poultry and so on.
As a practicing rancher and someone with tons of experience in the area, what advice will give them? What should they prioritize? What three things possibly should this ministry prioritize if they are to get things right?
Most importantly, breed improvements. Our animals or livestock, their productivity is so low because we've not, over the years, embarked on breed improvement. Those countries that we started together have gone too far. They crossbreed and get higher productive, animals.
Like which countries?
Like Brazil. Like most of the South American countries, South America. In fact, even here in Africa, like Kenya. They've given so much attention to the fact that they were able to even produce their own local breeds, a crossing of all this. So this is why they have to emphasize on. And breed improvement is for everybody. even our local, I mean, most important, our local, breeds. We have to, the government has to take the responsibility of, improving the breeds of these animals by crossbreeding them through bull donations or artificial insemination or embryo transfer to most of these animals.
So that is one. Number two,
priority. Two, feeds pasture production. We have problem of pasture. We don't care because nobody care. They move from one place to other, from Niger, pass through to Cameroon, and then they come back and so on. So nobody, government does not get itself involved in,
pasture development. So we do not have a sector that is providing the feed that these animals will eat.
No, I don't think there is now.
Is it a business proposition? Is it something that people can go into?
That's what they are encouraging now, which we have, even proposed. Some of us from the private sector have proposed. We want the government now. The government has even decided to import some of these seeds from some of these highly livestock developed areas like Brazil and so on, where these seeds are now going to be given to farmers who want. Any farmer can do that. In fact, we have the environment to produce whatever type of grass seeds that we want, or grass or pasture, to the extent that even some countries in the Middle East have been approaching us to produce pasture for them.
So pasture in itself can be a business, as you are saying, both for local consumption and
for
also
export.
Possibly for export.
Yes, because recently the Saudi Arabian government, at least they came in and then we discussed with them. They want a pasture. Alfalfa. There is another type of leguminous pasture that they want that could be produced and then baled and then sent to them. They will pay for it. They need about 1.2 million tons of that.
But we are not good at quality, because I've heard stories of a lot of Middle Eastern countries wanting whether goats and what have you, and then we can't produce them in a systematic way in the numbers they want, in a consistent way.
Let me tell you one thing. We have been having a lot of, we have been relaxed actually. More of us now, what is happening in this country today, with the pressure that we've been going in, now, there's nothing left for us than to develop the local, available resource that we have, especially in northern parts of this country. We have the wherewithal, we have the environment, we have the people doing nothing, all you need to.
But do we have the will?
Then we have to develop it. We have to push it. We have been pushed actually to the world now. Nothing to do. Look at people unemployed on the street. Look at our people. Nothing is doing.
But most of them are not interested in agriculture. They think it's just something that they don't want to dirty their hands.
They don't know. Now they have. In fact, without them, their hands are already dirty now. There's nothing they cannot eat. What type of what we are now talking about is that now that we have been pushed around, we go to the farms, you go to locality and see how people are going to. The young men who finish their secondary school, who finish their university, are going to the farm locally to do local production.
But a lot of them are discouraged when they see the hard, back-breaking labor that you have to do, because very low mechanization, you have to do all the things physically, is the kind of implements that our grandparents used that we are still using.
Improvement is coming up. It's not like it used to be before, to be sincere. We go into farming locally, we see what's happening. Not like crop farming now. People don't use much of horse now. They use chemical herbicides.
But is that good for the environment? Because there's this whole use of chemicals which are seeping into our water sources.
For now, for high production, there's just no way. We have to use chemicals, we have to use fertilizers. And that's what is being used all over. All these large-scale producers, they don't go for organic. They can do that for environment and for experiment and tell people that organic, but in the real sense of large-scale producers all over the world, you go to Russia, you go to Ukraine, you go to America, they still use chemicals and they use, fertilizers.
So you're a proponent that fertilizer and chemicals are the way if you want to do
mass production. Mass production.
But organic is just
but
for
they can
show.
go side by side.
Yes.
They can go by side. We can develop the organic one until the time that it's good enough to feed us. But for now, it cannot feed us. We have to go through the real way that is being done. So
what about GMOs? Because there are some of these seeds that are said to help produce in a big way.
We don't support that. Most of our farmers around, we don't support that. In fact, we try to run away from such a thing, because a lot of things happen, in trying to modify the genes or the characters of the chromosomes and to produce something of maybe that. You can see that even insects sometimes they don't eat that one, which means that it's something that is harmful to a living thing, which is not good for us. So we have not been supporting that, and we are against that, for GMOs. But you can develop your seeds without modifying the genes. All you need is cross them. If this high producing, bring it here. Imagine with this one, they start producing something much higher.
Back to the 3 priorities you were suggesting. You mentioned crossbreeding, you mentioned fodder, pasture development. What's the third one?
Then veterinary, animal health, disease control, which is very, very important.
We've just had the report of an anthrax in Zamfara State. Yes. Before that, we've had reports of bird flu.
Even PPR. I lost in this reason. I lost 110, goats and sheep.
What's PPR?
PPR. Well, it's
pulmonary or
no, it's not pulmonary. It's a mouth disease for small ruminants actually.
Right.
So this is a respiratory problem. But then besides that, there are other diseases, especially in poultry. Now we don't have vaccines. We have to import vaccines.
And we have the National Vaccine Research Institute in Bomb.
Yeah, but it's not enough. They can't produce half of what we need in this country. So this is something that with this ministry, they have emphasized. The minister, I heard him talking about, making sure that they double their production, and they encouraging the department, the veterinary institute, to increase its production, which is very important. These are the 3 things that you talk. Breed improvement, pasture development, and disease control.
From your own personal experience as a practicing farmer, both here in Abuja and at home, in Biu, even the Sarking Noma of Biu, what is the key thing to concentrate on if we are to get it right, and especially to get the succeeding farmers, because we are all getting old and the young people are not too interested?
Yes, it's true. The both actually, crop production and livestock production. But most importantly for me now, because I'm biased, I want the livestock to be improved. This is where it is an industry lying down, fallow. Because the animals, especially cow or cattle, that you see, if you can breed it, nothing that's going to be thrown out from it, include the viscera, include the blood, include the bones and the hooves and so on, all could have value chain. It has a value chain that you can use it for every other thing beside the meat. So this is something that I would want us to develop, to encourage. In fact, most importantly now, in livestock production, especially fattening now, it is left for us. All over the 9 northern states, anywhere that you go, you can fatten animals, and that's why we should have to encourage our young men and businessmen to invest in this. 2-3 states, you establish a very big abattoir. 2-3 states, you ask people, every local government area, keep animals, fatten animals, get a cooperative in that area. Everybody that has a fattening will bring it to that central area. That's going to be used to be slaughtered, either to be exported or to even taken to the south. For God's sake, we don't have to carry animals, live from one place to the other. Slaughter them. Get all the animals, pack them according to the requirement or desire of the people, and then send them to wherever they are supposed to be sent.
Very important point you are making. I can see you are getting worked up into it, but I'm afraid we've run out of time.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. So thank you very much for coming onto the program.
Thank you, and thank you, viewers.
Viewers, that's the end of this edition of 30 Minutes. Keep at it with us.